I want to talk in this video about the strongest argument, in a sense, for young Earth creationism, and then explain why that argument fails. So, first of all, what is the strongest argument? I think it's a theological a priori argument. The argument goes, and I'm not going to give it formally, but it goes roughly like this in the nuts and bolts. God is a good God, and as a good God, he created a creation that was good. And because it was good, it was without any suffering or death, parasitism, predation, extinction, so on. He created it good. So there's none of that. So that must have entered into creation through the actions of volitional creatures who brought evil into the world. And of course, that's exactly what we get. So it is a theodicy. It's an explanation for why there is suffering and death in the world and says that it came through the actions of morally culpable human beings. That's why things got messed up. That's why you have sharks that eat tuna and why you have bed bugs that engage in traumatic insemination and you have T-Rex eating Triceratops. It's all because of what human beings did. We've sinned, we brought that death into the world. And this is, of course, an argument that supports young Earth creationism, not only against theistic evolution or evolutionary creation, but also against old Earth creationism, because old Earth creationism is also committed to the idea that there is an extensive fossil record of death existing before the appearance of human beings. So that's the theological argument for young Earth creationism. Obviously, one big problem with it is the very problem that there is this scientific evidence for natural Earth history that there was death before the fall, there was predation, there was carnivory, there was parasitism, there was suffering, there was mass extinction. All of these things occurred before the appearance of any human beings on the earth. That is an empirical scientific argument against the truth of this theological claim. But I also want to argue that I think the strongest, in a sense, the strongest theological, the strongest argument against death before the fall is, in fact, a theological argument. Remember, as I said, this young earth creationist view is really, in its essence, a theodicy. It is an attempt to explain why there is evil and suffering in nature. Well, whether you think there's natural evil or not, there certainly is suffering in nature. How do you explain that if God is a good God? Well, this young earth creationist theodicy attributes it to the volitional actions of human beings who brought that corruption into the world. Um, the problem with this is I don't think that actually addresses theologically the problem here at all. It simply shifts the problem, the nature of the problem. So we have two different basic ways to interpret the young earth creationist account of how all of these things then came about through the actions of volitional human beings. So one way to think about it is that there is a simply a voluntarist punitive judgment that God executes upon all of creation because of the actions of human beings. In other words, because Adam and Eve sinned, God then punishes Adam and Eve by punishing all of creation, subjecting it all, in the words of Paul in Romans 8, to groaning, by weaving into the very fabric of creation from that point forward death, carnivory, predation, parasitism, extinction, so on. All of these things, God judged creation, God judged human beings and thereby creation by imputing all of these features into creation. This introduces a new problem for theodicy, which is why would God punish the natural world for the actions of voluntary human creatures who sinned in a garden? Why would God punish tuna by suddenly turning their once benign friend, the great white shark, into a predatory hunter that would now kill them? Why would God punish chubby, cute seals in the Arctic by suddenly transforming the once vegetarian polar bear into a hunter on the ice, killing those very seals? Why would God punish human beings, um, children, infants, potentially, all sorts of people indiscriminately by now evolving or creating, I should say, the guinea worm to mutate into the bodies and then eyes of human beings, gradually making them blind and inflicting upon them untold suffering? Why would God inflict upon Triceratops the punishment of having T-Rex that was once again a benign vegan living in harmony with Triceratops into a predatory hunter that would hunt and kill Triceratops. This is a new problem of evil. So the young earth creationist doesn't actually address the problem by attributing it to human volition. They simply shift the problem on this first account to why would God judge creation in this way? Now, there is one second approach a young earth creationist could take. The second approach would be that God didn't actually voluntarily judge creation because of what human beings did. Rather, what happened is in the beginning, God instituted certain natural laws into creation, such that if human beings voluntarily sinned in the garden, that would trigger these laws, or it would the effect in accord with these laws would be that creation would be transformed into the place of nature red in tooth and claw, full of suffering and agony that we now see. So, on this view, there are these natural laws, and the fact that creation now has death and suffering is simply a natural result of Adam and Eve's voluntary actions, much as a wood becoming a burnt cinder is simply the result of natural law as you throw that piece of wood into a fire. But on this second account, if it's not God, the problem doesn't shift to why would God judge creation and punish creation for what human beings did. Rather, the problem now becomes why would God institute creation with laws that would transform creation into this zone of suffering and death simply as a result of what two human beings voluntarily did in a garden? There is the additional problem of how would one even define or understand what kind of laws these could be such that a vegan shark would be transformed into a predatory killer, or a vegan polar bear would be transformed into a predatory killer. I don't can't even begin to get my mind around what kind of laws of nature those would be that would transform creatures that were once vegan into predatory carnivores based upon the voluntary actions of human beings in a garden in the Middle East. So, to conclude, I think that in young earth creationism, its strongest argument on the face is a theological a priori argument, which is a theodicy, defending God for why there is suffering and death in nature. But the two ways to explain the way the young earth creationism now addresses nature, red in tooth and claw, is either through judgment, like judging creation, or through the punishment, quote unquote, simply being the natural result of the actions of human beings because God had set up natural laws in the beginning that would lead to nature red in tooth and claw if human beings sinned. And neither one of those, to me, to my mind, is at all a plausible or acceptable solution. As far as theodicies go, this simply shifts the issue from one problem, why did God create originally with death and suffering, to these two new problems, which I don't find to be any more uh, easy to deal with than the original problem. Not only are they no more easy to deal with, but you have those new problems of theodicy alongside the fact that you have an empirical legacy or record of evidence that appears to discount the very scientific claims that undergird young earth creationism.